But confusion here doesn't mean we're confused whether or not these are flowers. We're confused about how they exist. So in fact, the word confusion is the same meaning as ignorance. So here we see the three poisons, the three main mental afflictions. All other mental afflictions come out of one of those or a combination of them. These mental afflictions are what are driving our behaviour. And the Buddhist assertion is that every action we do based on a mental affliction has a consequence, has a result, and the results of our actions are our experiences. And the Buddha, of course, used the word dukkha to describe the experiences, the human condition. So this is the process of how our distorted view of reality leads to the mental afflictions, leads to suffering, leads to our current situation that we're in. So therefore, if we want to overcome suffering or dukkha, we need to eliminate the underlying cause. We need to eliminate ignorance. So the long-term strategy is the Vipashyana practice of emptiness to overcome this ignorance. And if we can overcome that ignorance, then we'll overcome mental afflictions and suffering. One more point here. We said that things appear to exist completely independent of us, but they don't exist like that. The question is then, why do they exist like that if that's not how they really exist? And the answer is back here at ignorance. Every time we're grasping onto things existing independently, we're reinforcing the habit of the grasping. But there's another side effect of the ignorance called a latency of ignorance. Sometimes this is called stain. But literally the ignorance is staining our mind. And what that stain does is that when we come into contact with an object, it appears to exist completely independent of us. So if we want to overcome mental afflictions and suffering, we need to get rid of ignorance and mental afflictions. So this is what's called the afflictive obscurations. We see that in the bottom of your chart. So if we want to achieve liberation, if we want to achieve nirvana, we need to get rid of these afflictive obscurations, which is the mental afflictions, in particular the underlying mental affliction of ignorance. But even if we manage to get rid of this and achieve liberation, achieve nirvana, these stains are still in our mind because these are very difficult to get rid of. So even someone who's achieved nirvana has these stains, which means when they look out on the world, they also will still see things as they seem to appear independent of them. But because they've realised emptiness, they will realise directly this is not how they exist, so it will never cause any problems. But if we want to go on to achieve enlightenment, that's what we need to do. We need to get rid of these stains. And of course the mistaken dualistic appearance that they produce. So that is what's called the cognitive obscurations. We see that in the bottom of the chart. So this is what we need to get rid of to move from nirvana to enlightenment. So someone who's achieved full enlightenment won't have this mistaken dualistic appearance. What that means for us is unimaginable, because we've never had any other appearance except this. So to try to comprehend how that would look would be very, very difficult for us. But this is basically how to move from nirvana into enlightenment. We need to get rid of these stains. How do we get rid of these stains? Is still through the Vipashyana practice of emptiness, but we need a little bit of extra power behind that, and that extra power is the bodhicitta. Without the bodhicitta, then we won't have enough power to eliminate those stains. So then, just to summarise all this, and then I'm sure there's some questions, we have at the top this quote from Nagarjuna. So Nagarjuna was the great Indian master from the 2nd century who wrote this classic text here, The Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, which is a text explaining these teachings of emptiness that Buddha gave in the Perfection of Wisdom teachings. That, of course, is what we're looking at here. And this Nagarjuna then is really considered to be the founder of this, what's called the Madhyamika philosophical system. That philosophical system that presents this emptiness. And so what he says in his text here, he says, by extinguishing actions and mental afflictions, there is liberation. Actions and mental afflictions arise from misconceptions, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. So the word elaboration here is another word for this grasping, this ignorance. And elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness. So we can eliminate these elaborations, this ignorance, through the Vipashyana practice of emptiness. Okay, questions?
I didn't really understand the difference between seeing recognition and state of the Isn't seeing things as existing from their own side ignorance?
Seeing. Well, it depends what you mean by seeing. Seeing as if... The appearance, you mean?
Yeah.
No, the appearance is this. So, something can appear to us, but then we either accept that or we don't. Like, for example, now, when you look in a mirror, there's a reflection of you in the mirror, but you never grasp onto that as you, because you know it's just a reflection, even though it appears to be you, doesn't it? So there's a mistaken appearance of you, there seems to be you there in the mirror, but we know very easily that this appearance is deceptive, and so we never buy into it, we don't grasp onto that. Whereas I think a newborn baby and maybe cats and dogs do. They sort of, you often see a cat that sort of like thinks it's another cat and attacks it. So it has the grasping, but that sort of mistaken appearance for us is easy to discount. Another example is, sometimes we look on a hot sandy plain and it seems like there's water there, mirage, and if we haven't seen that before, we'll say, well, there's water there. There's a mistaken appearance of water and we are believing in it. But of course, if we really look at it closely, investigate it, we say, that appearance is deceptive. It's not water. So there's sort of some simple examples to explain the same.
I didn't understand what the meaning of dualistic or mistaken dualistic in this.
Yeah. Dualistic means like two independent things. Duality. Duality means two independent things. And mistaken means there is no independent things. But it seems to be.
What two things?
Me, world. Subject, object. Me, flowers.
And what about the dual of label and object?
Sorry?
Like, there's an object, there's a base of implication sometimes.
Right.
And label that we label.
Right.
This is also a dual, so I thought...
It's dual. I mean, dual doesn't just mean... It means two independent things. But can you have the designation flower independent of basis of designation of flower? I mean, how can you have basis of designation without designation?
Okay.
Yeah, they coexist.
All right.
So that's not dual. Dual is, like, another example is this big.
Excuse me?
Is it big?
Independent of substance.
So you can't have big and small. So duality is that's big, that's small. Non-duality is they're codependent. Duality means they're two independent things.
Okay.
So non-dual means that. That's actually, I'll add up something to that. When we come to realise this emptiness, often sometimes it's expressed in terms of realising non-duality, and then people mistakenly think, we're all one. That's dualistic. Because one, if everything's one, it means the same. Is big and small the same? Are they one? Are they one? No. But they're not two. So realising they're not two doesn't mean they're one.
What does it mean?
So it just means they're not two. Non-dual. Non-dual does not mean everything's one. So there's two. Now for us, two things are either the same or different. Different for us means big, small, dualistic. So same is also dualistic. One is dualistic. So you can't say everything's one. You can just say things are not two or non-dual.
Okay. And the other thing. Oh yeah. You talked here about cognitive fusion, and
Yeah.
it sort of in my mind it was like saying the opposite of dual.
No, yeah, so, yeah, but that's one. Cognitive fusion is you're making them one.
Okay.
So that's dualistic. So two and one is dualistic. So either we see them as two separate things, independent things, or we fuse them. That's also duality. So we have a basis of designation, if we want to use that way of talking, and the designation. Is the basis of designation and the designation the same? No. So therefore, we fuse the designation flower with that. We say this is a flower.
But it's also.
I mean, as long as we understood when we say this is a flower, we mean we are labelling this a flower. But by saying that, we're really leading ourselves in that direction of fusing the label to the basis. This is a flower from its own side.
I would
So
say
this is
it's
the problem.
opposite. I would say that the language is just merely reflects our ignorance. It's not like the fact that we are saying it is making us ignorant.
No, it's not making us ignorant, but I'm saying that way of speaking just reinforces our ignorance. Yeah? I mean, of course we're already ignorant. It's not that causes the ignorance. No, you're right, it doesn't. It just sort of, makes it more solid. Speaking like that.
I get confused when I think about these things with relation to the spiritual path.
Spiritual path.
Yeah,
In what sense?
in few ways.
Right.
I think my major problem is between aversion towards things that are not beneficial
Right.
and
Right. So.
it comes up in my mind.
Right. So what are you saying?
Like who is initiating the practice?
Initiating the practice.
Who wants like the mind?
You do. You the person. No.
But isn't it kind of a form of aversion / attachment?
Well, if it is, our spiritual practice is not going anywhere. I mean, you can be attached to meditating. You can be attached to achieving nirvana. You can have aversion to dullness or distraction. those will torpedo your practice. You'll just get caught up in mental afflictions. So of course, there are things that we need to eliminate, and there are things we need to cultivate. But if we have attachment to the things we want to cultivate and aversion to the things we want to eliminate, we're going to suffer. That's just, we need to get rid of that.
But this is why I wonder, so I thought, okay, maybe I can get rid of that through emptiness.
Well, there's a number of things we can do, of course. And we're going to be looking at that. I mean, here we saw the long-term strategy, and now we're going to, in the next session, and continue a bit tomorrow morning, the short-term strategy, which will include some of these things as well.
Yeah, I understand the difference between the concept of a flower and a flower.
Concept of a flower and a flower. Okay, go on. But I mean, a flower is not a concept. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not it's not the concept. It's not the concept, but the way I look at it is the concept.
No, not now. The way we look at it now, it's there. That's how we see it now, that the flower is there.
Yeah.
So, go on.
So my question is, I think I understand it, but yet, like the example you said about the desert.
No. That's not an example. That's an analogy.
Analogy, yeah.
So analogies are never examples.
Okay.
Because then they wouldn't be an analogy.
Okay.
So an analogy is something simple to help understand something more profound.
Okay, I think.
So what often happens is, when we use an analogy, people think they're examples and then they go completely astray. They take the analogy too far. So it's only an analogy, it's not an example, like the mirror. Yeah. Of course, the reflection is not a person. But we're not saying that is not functioning as a flower. So it's not so these are analogies, not examples.
I think I understand it,
Mm-hmm.
but yet I find it difficult to live it or to.
And again, if we only intellectually understand it, in fact, we could even intellectually understand it very well. In fact, we could be the smartest Buddhist scholar in the entire planet and be completely miserable. Because intellectual understanding is not really going to change anything. If we really use that intellectual understanding all day long, reminding ourselves, it'd probably help a bit, but it'd be hard work and limited. So what we need to do is bring that intellectual understanding into experience through this Vipashyana practice of emptiness. If we can experientially see things as merely labelled, big change. If we just intellectually accept things are merely labelled, I think not much is going to change in our life at all. Is that the question?
Yeah, I wanted to.
Yeah.
Another question to do with the first meditation we did this afternoon. I was inquiring about my ego. I asked myself. I asked, where is my ego?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I could see the end result of my ego the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
but also I couldn't find my ego. Just exactly like I couldn't find myself.
Good. Very good. I mean, of course, it depends how we define the word ego. I mean, generally, I don't often use that word because probably in this room there's 10 different ideas of what the word ego means, and if I put that out there, we'll get confused. But tomorrow, I may use that word, but then I'll say what I mean by that word. And then you can check whether your understanding of ego is the same or not. But yeah, we have to be very careful when we sort of throw these words around like ego and so forth. we need to define them clearly if we're going to use them.
What I understand is that the knowledge, any meaning that I see,
What, sorry? The knowledge?
the awareness, that I'm aware, that I'm aware. If I can see you, but I
Right.
don't see you, I see you through my eyes, through my experience, through my labeling of
Right.
what I think about you.
Right.
So just to be aware of that.
Sure.
So
Fantastic.
like if you go, you're going and you see someone and you see what you think about him. So that's it. He's not the one that you. This is the.
That's already a great
the
improvement.
Huh?
That's a great improvement already, because we can see that we are constructing our.
So everything is depend on my label, my view, my labeling.
Yes, for you.
So
But
just-
we need to be careful here that we don't fall to what's called solipsism. Solipsism means I'm the only real thing, everything else in the universe is just a figment of my imagination, even these people here. So,
No, it's the way I see them, the way I see everything. It's
Great.
through my eyes, through my views, and
Sure.
just to know it.
yeah, I mean, of course, because otherwise, then you can see that there's no objective thing there, because we are interpreting.
So everything is my interpretation, of course.
Right, but again, that doesn't mean that we're just hallucinating, we're making up things. This is the key, and that's what's going to come more a little bit later, is when we're going this way to generate that understanding, to check whether that understanding is valid, we need to be able to hold, together with whatever understanding we're developing, we need to be able to hold functioning world with that. Because often when we start to have that understanding or develop an understanding, the idea of a functioning world starts to sort of collapse.
Can you give an example?
Like then people mistakenly interpret that this is just, I'm just making this up. I can do whatever, I can make up whatever I want. That nothing really exists because I'm just sort of making it up. But then we've lost causality, we've lost functioning world. This is still more to come, but this is a measure of how our understanding is going of emptiness. Is the understanding we're developing, are we able to hold that understanding and together with that, hold an understanding there is a functioning world? That's the key. But more will come.
I was how do I know during the meditation when I try to answer intellectually and when
Try to answer.
by thinking and when and how when do I experience it?
Right. Yeah. So remember, in this sort of practices, we can apply reasoning and logic, but it's based on our experience. We're not just sort of thinking about things. That's just philosophy. So we can use a more direct observation, or we can guide that through some reasoning and logic, but it's still observation. We're not just sort of thinking about things. Otherwise, it's not Vipashyana practice. So what we're going to see tomorrow is we're going to do this investigation with respect to ourselves as a person, and that's using a more sort of reasoning and logic approach, but it's still observation, but based on reasoning and logic. Whereas the following day, where we look at the mind, it's much more of a sort of direct approach. But in both of them, we are observing, not just thinking about things.
I wanted to ask if I
Just observing what?
The object.
Right, but remember, now the object appears to exist completely independent of us. So if we're just observing, yeah, but then we need to have something, what's the word? Something directing us. Because if we just look, then there's a cup there and it seems to exist independently. But we need something behind that to question that appearance. So we need at least some question or some line of reasoning that we are using to look at that. If we're just looking, unless we're very intuitive, I think you'll just look and you'll go, oh, okay. Seems to be there. But if we have some line of reasoning or some sort of question behind, then we can look in a certain way, and then we can come to some insight.
Are we going to stop existing while we don't have any more mental afflictions?
No, you'll exist, you'll have no suffering, and you'll still be you.
No world, no functioning, no functionality. There's no.
But that's what I was saying here, is that, and this is going to still more come, still coming.
We're going to stop existing in a certain way.
Yeah, so emptiness means functioning world. Functioning world means emptiness. So this is a difficult point, and this is what it's still coming. But basically what we're saying is that you can't cease to exist. What you will realise is that you don't exist the way you think you do. Because the way we think we exist in the world exists is causing us so much suffering. And if we can let go of that, there'll still be a you in a world, but we'll be able to see it as it is, which means it'll be impossible to have mental afflictions and suffering. But you'll still be you, and there'll still be a world. Don't worry about that.
When you explain us this, it is understandable. It's not a problem, but to really see emptiness,
Right.
I guess it's really hard. My question is,
Well, okay.
how common anybody here somewhere who's not going to go to Thailand for 20 years can realize emptiness really?
I'm just speculating, but I'd say there's quite a number of people in this room who've had some taste of emptiness already. Whether it's through this sort of formal practice or through other stimulus. So to actually have a valid taste is not difficult. In fact, sometimes people have them spontaneously in their life. The difficult thing is to sustain that and deepen it. And that's what this is all about. So having an experience of emptiness is not difficult.
No, but living like sustain, yeah.
Right, but again, even, and I think probably quite at least a number of people in this room who've had a little taste, not only had a little taste, but actually had quite a strong impact, positive impact for some period of time, maybe even for weeks or months, and then it sort of wore off. So I'm sure there are a number of people in the room who've had that, and maybe not even doing any meditation, just through some stimulus, reading something, seeing something, poof, and then very strong. So if we have, that hopefully would inspire us to go further, and let's do it in a systematic way so that we can deepen that, and every time we deepen it, we'll have more and more positive impact in our life. Last question, we need to break for dinner.
The nature of reality is, you can't describe it in words because words are labels. So we can't use language, we can only use experience to see that in a way.
Well, you can understand it intellectually, but yes. And even when we have a little taste, it's still a little bit dualistic or conceptual, but a direct experience, yes, is completely beyond language.
But then, if our memory is also using